Hello, this is David from DN Cognitive Counseling. I'm responding to a question that I got from Eve on a previous video. Eve asked me, what is rapprochement? So I decided to do this video for Eve to answer that question. And for anybody else who didn't know what that was, or may just want to go ahead and understand how it works and what rapprochement was. There was a psychologist named Margaret Mahler. She was born in the late 1800s, and she died actually in 1985. So she's relatively contemporary, and she's actually the first psychiatrist to actually study children. You know, Freud and Erikson, who came up with their ideas, studied adults and worked backwards by talking about children from the standpoint of looking at adults. Mahler was the first to actually study kids 0 to 3 to understand how they separate and individuate from their parents. And that's what a lot of our work was focused in on. Now, the reason why that's important is that a lot of times parents view the young toddlers as being oppositional or defiant, and it gets a lot of problems in the parent-child relationship. But if you understand developmentally what's going on, you understand that it's absolutely normal for your young toddler to want to assert their independence. And we all know what a toddler's favorite word is. No. No is a way for the toddler to set a boundary for themselves. A way to say that I'm separate from you. It's a way to go ahead and assert their independence. And a lot of times parents view this as a defiant aspect in a child, and their reactions sometimes create bigger problems. That does not mean that you did something wrong as the parent, that your child is saying no or individuating. But we'll talk about that as we talk about the steps of what Mahler was trying to tell us and what she actually saw and witnessed by studying kids. But this is so important to understand when you are trying to figure out as a parent if you're doing the right thing by your child. And as I talked about in a previous video, not everything a parent does leads to a problem for a child. Children will create their own needs for their separation individuation, which will cause a conflict between the parent-child relationship. And again, it's absolutely normal. Let's talk about the first stage, which Mahler calls the autistic stage. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'll be using the term mother as the primary caregiver, only because that's what Mahler does in her work. But it really does translate to whoever the primary caregiver is. But again, I'm going to use the term mother for that, just for the purposes of this video. At the very beginning of life, every baby that is born is focused on their own needs. Basically, they're looking to find their needs being provided for in their environment. So what happens is the child will react upset and angry when they don't get what they need. Now, anger is actually the wrong word. They're actually crying because they're in pain. They're in hunger pain. They're in discomfort pain, which is the reason why you should never, ever not be responsive to a 0 to 1 month old. You'll hear sometimes parents say, oh, let them cry it out. It would be inappropriate to say that a child should cry it out until a child has something called object permanence, which is the idea that they understand that things that they don't see anymore are still around. When an infant is crying, they don't cry to alert mommy. They're crying because they're in pain. Mommy, hearing the cry, does become reactive to it, and it's actually biological also. Mothers, fathers have a strong reaction to their baby's cry. And that is biologically put in so that we become reactive to be able to take care of their needs. It becomes a cycle. You see the circle. That you see the baby is crying because they're in pain. The mother becomes reactive, takes care of the baby. And in that autistic stage, that baby is only concerned about getting their needs met. And that's all they care about. The second stage is called the normal symbiotic stage. Now this is interesting because the infant acknowledges or understands that there's something outside of themselves that is an entity outside of themselves, and that entity is taking care of their needs. And this, again, generally takes place between the age of 1 month to 5 months. So the infant is aware of this other entity, but believes that that entity is actually a part of themselves. And that is the basis of the beginning of the relationship for the child to the mother. It's incredibly important for the mother to adapt successfully to the infant's needs during the stage in order to again bolster the relationship, which brings us to the third stage that Mahler talks about. And that's actually the separation individuation stage, which has 4 subsets. And again, this takes place between the ages of 5 months to 24 months. Now, if you notice, between 5 and 24, a lot of children hit what's called the terrible twos. So during this, you have an overlapping aspect of where there's separation, that the infant develops an understanding of boundaries, of self, and that the mother is an individual different than them, that they're not the same, they're not symbiotic. And what happens that the child goes ahead and understands this separation, and it causes them a lot of anxiety. So there are 4 subparts to the separation that starts basically between 5 and 9 months. Now the first one is called what Mahler called hatching. The infant will learn based upon their ability to crawl and allow them to physically separate from their mother, and they begin to move further away and feel more comfortable with movement away from the mother, but then having to come back. So they again start to see the mother as separate from them, but not, and they go back and they go forth. And this takes place during that hatching stage, again between the ages of 5 to 9 months. The next sub-stage is called the practicing stage. This is when a child really begins to walk and they become more autonomous in their ability, and they're able to explore their environment a little more freely. But you'll notice that at times they'll go to mom and run back, and go to mom and run back, and they're becoming more comfortable in the environment outside of themselves. And the child is experiencing the world based upon their point of view, separate from their parents. And they see themselves as being pretty much separate from the parents at this point, but still running back for that security and safety that they felt growing up. The next stage would be called Rapprochement. At this point, the child desires to achieve their independence. But by achieving the independence, they're also fearful of losing their parent. They're afraid of being abandoned. Therefore, the child seeks to maintain proximity to the parent while also engaging in exploration. And this goes back and forth during this time period where they're fearful but wanting to do things. This is the reason why sometimes you'll see that your child will try to tie their shoelaces, and when you take over, you help them, they'll get angry because they want to assert their independence, but at the same time they fear the abandonment. And that fight inside of themselves leads them to have that type of crisis. So again, in the aspect of rapprochement, there's the beginning part where the child returns to the caregiver in order to share the experiences and excitement, but also to feel the idea that their parent is sharing with them and they're still part of that symbiotic relationship. Then you have what's called the crisis, where the child recognizes that they have limitations, despite the fact that they want to do things, that they have limitations that they can't control, that they want to be able to tie their shoes, get dressed, put on everything correctly. But then they realize they can't. So the child is torn between choosing physical and emotional proximity to their caregiver versus their own sense of independence. And this is why the stage is characterized by temper tantrums. And it's not because parents are doing something wrong to their children. Temper tantrums are normal at this stage of development. And no matter what you do as a parent, your child needs to develop that. Then you have what's called the solution. The child reaches the healthy medium between the extremes, and they normally develop their language, and superego development starts at this age, and the crisis is resolved. There will be an increase in sometimes clinging or shunning behavior. And again, that has to do with the element of the child and their own internal drives. Now, as a parent, we can help shape, but your child is who your child is. You know, I always think about art when you're creating a child. I forgot which artist that said this. They asked him, how did you create such beautiful art? And his response was, I chipped away what was basically holding it in. And in a sense, that's what we do with our children. We don't create who they are as people, but we help to chip away the outside stuff that helps to show you who they really are. Again, if you found this helpful, please hit subscribe. If you like this video, please like it. If you have people in your family that could use this information or people that would like to be able to be educated on this, please share it with them. And if you believe what I'm doing is helpful, then you could also go ahead to Subcribe-star and become a patron to help me out on this endeavor. And I thank you very much for joining me tonight. And again, thank you, Eve, for that question, because it was a great question, and I hope you found this helpful.